Karen was still screaming when the bulldozer blade punched through her HOA office wall, paper fines fluttering like confetti into the lake air. Her voice cracked as she realized what was happening, watching her precious fake authority crumble, literally, on a foundation that never belonged to her. I stood there, calm, boots planted in the soil I own, watching years of HOA tyranny collapse into splinters on my land. You ever see someone realize, in real time, that they just declared war on the wrong man? What kind of idiot sinks a boat in a lake she doesn't even own, then finds the man who does? There's a kind of silence only a lake can hold. The stillness that settles across the water before sunrise, when the mist hasn't yet decided if it wants to rise or fall. That's the kind of peace I built my life around. My name is Mason Briggs, and I don't live on the lake. I own it. 62 acres of prime forest-wrapped water, fed by underground springs and watched over by 3 generations of my family. The lake's officially named Morgan's Rest, after my grandfather, but most folks around here just call it Briggs Lake. My house sits on the western ridge, a craftsman lodge with a wraparound porch, cedar beams, and a flagpole out front that hasn't missed a dawn in 40 years. When the wind hits just right, the flag snaps once, a warning shot to anyone who thinks this land is up for negotiation. It's not. My dogs roam leashless, the docks are my design, and the only rules that matter are the ones written in the soil by men who worked it. I retired young, after selling my logistics company to a national distributor. I don't need to explain what I do for a living to anyone, because I don't need to do anything anymore. I fish, I hike. I read case law for fun and keep my permits current because peace is only guaranteed by the man who can back it up. The nearest town is 4 miles down the gravel road. The nearest problem used to be 5. Until they built Eagle Crest, a planned HOA community with a marketing brochure full of buzzwords like eco-integrated, elevated lifestyle, and securely monitored. Sounded like a prison with artisanal landscaping. The first time I saw the construction crews roll in, I knew it would mean trouble eventually. It always does when people try to civilize something that's already whole. They built it fast, cheap materials with fancy facades, cookie-cutter homes that looked like they were stamped out of the same mold. I stayed out of it. My property line runs east all the way down to the lake's lower bend, then curls north into the woods like a shepherd's crook. Legally, everything from my back deck to the far shore is mine. I pay taxes on the water itself. That lake doesn't just reflect the sky, it reflects my authority. But they didn't care. The first notice showed up taped to my mailbox in a pastel envelope labeled Friendly Guidance. It wasn't official, just a request to harmonize the paint on my boathouse to match the HOA-approved earth tones visible from the eastern side of the lake. I laughed, threw it in the fire pit, and didn't think twice. Then came the second one, about unauthorized signage. They didn't like the no trespassing sign I bolted to a birch tree on the shared hiking path. Called it aggressive in tone. I called it truthful. I'd been maintaining that trail for over 20 years. My grandfather carved the first steps into the hillside before most of Eagle Crest's residents were even born. Their trail signs showed up overnight. New wood, synthetic rope railings, QR codes linking to community maps. My land was being absorbed one clipboard at a time. One day, I watched a couple walk their golden retriever right across my dock like it was a public pier. I stepped outside, coffee in hand, and said, "You're 50 feet past where your laws apply." The man turned red. The woman huffed. They retreated. But that wasn't the end of it, just the start. More notices followed. Suggestions, they called them. All unsigned, all written in that same patronizing tone that makes you want to punch a font in the face. I let them pile up in a shoebox in the entry hall. It was like watching a storm build across the lake. The wind hasn't hit yet, but you can feel the pressure drop. You can taste the rain before it falls. Then they crossed the line. Literally, I was clearing brush near the east ridge, my land, when I noticed a new bench had been installed. Fresh stain, decorative plaque, and a little flag indicating it was donated by the HOA Beautification Subcommittee. It sat 10 feet over the line, on my side. That was no accident. I took it apart in under 10 minutes and stacked the pieces in a tidy pile on their side of the property line. That got their attention. a liaison named Jordan knocked on my door the next day. Skinny guy in khakis, clipboard practically welded to his palm, claimed he was here to build neighborly relations. I told him he was trespassing and gave him 30 seconds to get off my deck. He made it in 15. But the point had been made. They weren't stopping. I installed game cameras, not for wildlife, for HOA incursions. It wasn't long before I caught 2 of their board members snooping around my dock with a measuring tape. I printed the footage, stapled it to a wooden post, and planted it at the entrance to the lake trail. Captioned it, "Smile for the lawsuit." Karen arrived shortly after that. Platinum blonde, mid-50s. Teeth too perfect to be real. She introduced herself as the president of Eagle Crest Homeowners Association, said it like it was supposed to impress me. Claimed she just wanted to open a dialogue. I told her the only dialogue I accept comes in the form of signed easements and lease agreements, neither of which she had. She tried to charm me. Then she tried to threaten me. Something about visual disruptions and neighborhood compliance. I reminded her, very clearly, that I do not, have not, and will never belong to her HOA. She tried to argue. I shut the door. From then on, it got worse. HOA flyers appeared on my windshield at the grocery store. Teenagers in vests patrolled the lake's edge with clipboards and iPads. Their Facebook page shared a passive-aggressive post about non-compliant lake activity and environmental concerns regarding private boat use. That was the first time I realized they weren't just encroaching physically. They were trying to redefine the narrative. Paint me as a rogue landowner, a disruptive element, an outlier standing in the way of community progress. They had no idea who they were dealing with. I've been sued, audited, and threatened by corporate execs worth 50 times what Karen's house is. I've outlasted them all. Because when you own the land, when you pay the taxes, when your name is carved into the granite at the county office, they can send all the pastel notices they want. None of it changes the dirt. And this dirt is mine. I knew it was only a matter of time before Karen made a bigger move. The kind that doesn't come with a clipboard. The kind that crosses the line not just in distance, but in principle. I just didn't expect her to go after the one thing more personal than my property. I didn't expect her to sink my boat. It started with a letter, not the usual pastel garbage they'd been leaving like HOA propaganda candy, but a certified envelope, hand-delivered by some kid who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. The return address said Eagle Crest Environmental Review Board, which I didn't know existed, probably because Karen had just made it up. Inside was a multi-page document printed on glossy paper with a fake seal, covered in graphs and buzzwords. It accused my classic wooden fishing boat, hand-built by my father in 1973, of being an unregistered pollutant source, a structural hazard, and my personal favorite, a lakefront aesthetic disruptor. It was written like a science journal had been run through a blender with a thesaurus and a vanity blog. At the bottom, in bold font, was a fine, 3-0. Remit payment within 14 days or face further enforcement actions. Below that, in smaller print, violator has been placed on Community Watch List Tier 2. The problem? I don't belong to their community. Not on paper, not in practice, not even in fantasy. My land is legally exempt from their jurisdiction by decades. My lake is registered under my family trust. A fact you can verify by walking into the county clerk's office and reading the damn plaque on the wall. But Karen didn't care about facts. She cared about control. I laughed when I read it. Laughed so hard my ribs hurt. I posted the notice on the fridge under a magnet shaped like a trout and went about my day. But Karen doesn't take laughter well. Especially not when it's directed at her paper-thin authority. A week later, I found her standing on the edge of my dock, arms crossed, face pinched like she was trying to suck a lemon through her nose. She was wearing a sun hat the size of a satellite dish and a white linen outfit that looked like it had never touched dirt in its life. Behind her were 2 HOA enforcers, clipboard cowboys with matching polo shirts and mirrored sunglasses. They looked like mall cops on a field trip. "You're in violation," Karen said, without even a hello. "Of what?" I asked, stepping onto the dock with my coffee. "Being better at boat ownership than you?" Section 4.2 of the Community Waterway Preservation Act, she replied smugly, waving her tablet. That's not a real thing, I said. It is now, she chirped, and that's when I realized how far she was willing to go. She wasn't just trying to scare me, she was building a false legal framework, hoping I wouldn't challenge it. I turned to the two enforcers. Y'all planning to trespass today, or just loiter and sweat? They didn't answer. Karen smiled wider. We've received multiple complaints about your vessel. Oil leaks, non-compliant fuel storage. It's a liability risk and an ecological concern. I looked at my boat, old Ruby. She was a 19-foot cedar strip beauty, with brass rails and a rumble that made the water hum. I maintained her like a museum piece. Every gasket, every screw, every coat of varnish. She was the heart of the lake, a floating heirloom. That boat's cleaner than your HOA books, I said. Leave. Karen didn't, but I did. I turned and walked off the dock because I'd already told her once before this wasn't her jurisdiction, and I didn't negotiate with delusion. The next morning, old Ruby was gone. I stood at the edge of the dock, staring at the empty cleats and the torn rope ends fluttering like ghost limbs. The water was too calm, too quiet. No drift marks, no wake, no signs of life. She hadn't floated away. She'd been taken. I walked the shore, checked the trail cams, scoured the perimeter. Nothing. That kind of silence only comes when someone plans for it. I was still searching when Karen showed up again, this time on a paddleboard, wearing a smug expression and sunglasses that cost more than most people's rent. She didn't say anything at first, just floated there like a smug sea witch. Looking for something? She finally asked. You have one chance to tell me where my boat is, I said, voice low. Oh, it's still here, she replied sweetly. Just submerged. We had it safely relocated beneath the lake surface. It was a necessary environmental action. My brain stuttered. You what? I filed an emergency motion under our hazardous vessel mitigation program, she said, as if reading from a script. It's temporary, of course, but given the leak concerns and the visual discord it introduced to our community lakefront view, we felt decisive action was required. It's not your lake, I snapped. Actually, she said, flipping her tablet around to show a sat map with digitally drawn boundaries. There's a community overlay that extends to the waterline. I nearly laughed. That overlay is a hallucination. Not according to our bylaws, she said, paddling away. Have a compliant day. I stared after her, my fists clenched, heart pounding. Old Ruby wasn't just a boat. She was memory. My father's calloused hands showing me how to sand the hull, the smell of engine oil mixed with lake air and cedar. First fishing trips. Last ones. Laughter echoing off the water. My heritage had been sunk like it was a garden gnome they didn't like. And Karen was proud of it. I dove that afternoon. Wetsuit, weights, underwater flashlight. It took me 2 hours, but I found her. 20 yards off the dock, resting on her side in 15 feet of silt. The hull was intact, but the tow rope had been cut, and the bow had impact marks. Someone had intentionally dumped her. I surfaced, climbed out, and stood on the shore, shaking with cold and fury. This wasn't a fine. This was sabotage. A deliberate act. And it was war. I didn't scream. I didn't call the sheriff. I walked straight to the barn, pulled out the files my grandfather had kept in a steel cabinet labeled Property Disputes, and started digging. That was the moment Karen crossed the line from nuisance to enemy, and she was about to learn the difference between a community president and a land baron. She sank my boat thinking it would scare me, but all she did was wake something she couldn't sink. Not with bylaws, not with fake maps, and not with 1,000 paddleboards. It was the maps that did it. Old ones. Folded, yellowed, smelling of damp cedar and the decades they'd survived in a filing cabinet my grandfather welded shut before I was born. I hadn't opened that drawer in years. It took an angle grinder and a memory I wasn't ready to revisit. But the moment Karen had the audacity to sink old Ruby and call it necessary action, I knew I'd need more than fury. I'd need proof, land law, and something colder than vengeance. Legal leverage. I laid the documents out across the barn workbench. Survey plats from 1958. County assessor's blueprints. Topographic overlays, all in faded ink and pencil with margins full of my grandfather's meticulous notes. Every inch of our acreage plotted out like sacred scripture. The lake, the woods, the slope grades, the easement trails, and then, in a fresh file dated 2012, the year Eagle Crest got their zoning permits, I found the modern survey, courtesy of a subcontracted land development firm out of Marietta. I stared at it for a long time. Something didn't add up. The boundaries they'd drawn for the Eagle Crest community wrapped suspiciously close to the eastern edge of the lake. Too close. I opened my grandfather's original survey again, laid a transparency over it, and used a grid overlay to align the north points. The misalignment was subtle, but devastating. A 30-foot discrepancy. On paper, it looked like a margin of error. On the ground, it was a foundational mistake. Or, more likely, a lie. I walked the perimeter myself to be sure. From my southeast property marker, an iron stake buried in the roots of a red maple, I paced the boundary line with a GPS unit and a forestry compass. What I found made my skin crawl. The entire rear section of the Eagle Crest HOA building, the pristine glass monstrosity with fake colonial columns and a private boardroom overlooking my lake, was planted squarely on my land. Not just a corner. Not just an overhanging awning. I'm talking full-blown concrete foundation, flower beds, irrigation lines, solar panel mounts, all 30 feet past their legal claim, every inch of it trespassing. The land beneath their precious HOA headquarters? Not theirs. Never was. I sat down on the bench outside their building, my bench now, technically, and just stared at the wall for a good long while. I think I even smiled. They'd thrown every fake law in their arsenal at me, sunk my boat, shamed me on social media, printed flyers accusing me of lake pollution. But while they were playing suburban dictator, they never thought to confirm their own domain. It was like watching a castle built on quicksand, and I held the water rights. I took photos, videos, measured again, documented everything with timestamps. I even ran a GIS overlay through the county system just to be sure the error hadn't been quietly corrected. It hadn't. I called in a friend, Connor Halperin, a retired county land commissioner who owed me a favor from a fencing dispute I helped him win back in 2014. He showed up that afternoon with a topo drone and a laser plotter. By sunset, we had a full 3D map confirming the violation. "You're not just right," he said, tapping the screen. "You're owed back rent, damages, and possibly punitive compensation if they've hosted revenue-generating events on your land." "They've hosted fundraisers," I said. "Weddings, HOA barbecues, a 4th of July fireworks show." Connor whistled. "That office isn't just a building," he said. "It's evidence." That night, I sat at the dining table with every deed, blueprint, zoning document, and drone overlay spread around me like war plans. I wasn't just going to send a strongly worded letter. I was going to drop a legal hammer so heavy it would register on a seismograph. I started drafting a notice of trespass, then a land use violation complaint. I contacted 2 lawyers, one civil, one real estate. Both confirmed what I already knew. I owned the dirt under their empire, and they'd never paid a cent to use it. I ran the numbers. 10 years of unauthorized use. Utilities drawn through my easement. Events held on my property without permits. Property tax mismatches. The dollar signs kept climbing. High 6 figures. Maybe more. I pulled my old camcorder out of the safe and filmed a walkthrough of the property line, narrating every measurement, every boundary marker, every piece of visible evidence. I printed a sign and staked it 10 feet in front of their building. Warning: this structure is located on private property. Evidence of trespassing has been filed. The next morning the emails started coming, first from Karen, then from someone named Brent, her vice president, then from an HOA legal rep with a name so long it sounded made up, all asking politely at first if we could come to an amicable resolution. I ignored them. 2 days later, they called my bluff. Held a community meeting inside the office, on my land. I showed up 10 minutes in, wearing jeans, a button-down, and a GoPro on my chest. Walked right through the front door, past the receptionist, and into the main meeting room where Karen stood lecturing about protecting community assets. She froze mid-sentence when she saw me. "You're not allowed in here," she hissed. "On the contrary," I said, walking to the podium. "This is my land, which means I can walk into my building anytime I want." Someone laughed. Karen did not. "This is community space," she said, reaching for her iPad like it was a badge. "Built under city permits and HOA funding." I reached into my folder and held up a certified land deed. "Built 30 feet over the line, and you didn't check the survey, which makes every dollar you spent someone else's problem." Murmurs broke out in the crowd. Someone actually gasped. Karen's smile twitched, then dropped entirely. "You can't just—" "I can," I said. "And I will." I stepped down from the podium and added, "You've got 30 days to vacate. After that, I file for eviction and demolition. The law's on my side, Karen, not your clipboard." I left the building. It was the first time I'd ever seen her speechless. The calm before the collapse. But I wasn't finished. Not yet. What Karen didn't know was that I wasn't going to let this drag out in court for years. I had a plan, a legal one. And once it started, not even her entire HOA board could stop what was coming. She'd sunk my boat. But I just found the leverage to sink her kingdom. The eviction letter went out on a Thursday. I paid extra to have it served by a bonded courier in a full suit, not because I needed to, but because I wanted the visual. The envelope was heavyweight, sealed with a wax stamp bearing my family crest, and signed in thick black ink. Inside, the notice was simple. "This structure has been verified to occupy 254 square feet of private property belonging to Mason J. Briggs. You are hereby ordered to vacate the premises and cease all operations within 30 calendar days. Failure to comply will result in legal demolition and seizure of all structures and utilities under trespass and misuse statutes per County Ordinance 16.8. No threats, no insults, just law. Cold, sharp, and surgically accurate." I sent copies to every HOA board member, registered mail. Copies to the county records office, zoning board, sheriff's department, and even the local newspaper. I wasn't just drawing a line in the sand, I was firing the first legal volley. Karen didn't take it well. She called me that evening, voice like vinegar and static. "You think you can bully us out of our own office?" she snapped. "No," I replied calmly. "I'm just reclaiming what's already mine." "You can't evict a community organization," she said. "We're protected under residential nonprofit statutes." I smiled into the phone. "Karen, that applies to organizations operating on their own land. Yours is currently squatting on mine. Check the address again." "I'll wait." She hung up. The next morning, the HOA released a newsletter titled Community Under Siege, complete with doctored diagrams, cherry-picked screenshots, and a paragraph calling me a rogue landholder with a vendetta against Harmony. It made the rounds fast. They passed it out door to door, taped it to mailbox posts. I found one stuffed under my windshield at the grocery store. But while Karen stirred the pot with her propaganda campaign, I was baking something else entirely, a legal scorched earth policy. Step 1 was silence. I didn't respond to the newsletter. Didn't comment online. Didn't take interviews. Let them build their narrative. Because when you know the law's on your side, you don't shout, you wait for the echo. Step 2 was inspection. I hired a private structural engineer to examine the HOA building. Took him 2 hours to identify 4 code violations, 2 foundational faults, and 1 buried septic line improperly connected to a runoff trench that drained, wait for it, directly into my lake. Photos, timestamps, affidavit. I sent it all to the county environmental office. Step 3 was leverage. I drafted an invoice, 10 years of unauthorized occupancy, itemized by square footage, market lease value, and backdated with a modest 4% annual increase. Total, $280. 7-0. Due in 30 days. Enclosed, the option to vacate or settle. I dropped that one off in person. walked it right up to the glass doors of the HOA building, and slid it through the drop slot like a letter to Santa. Then, I turned, looked directly into their security camera, and tipped my hat. Step 4 was support. Not everyone in Eagle Crest was on Karen's side. Turns out, not everyone likes paying $400 a month dues to repaint their mailbox every season and report their neighbors' petunias. I started getting anonymous messages, photos, video clips. Meeting minutes leaked from inside the HOA board. Turns out Karen had been using discretionary funds to pay for spa weekends and decorative restoration of her backyard gazebo. I compiled it all, labeled it Exhibit C. Step 5. Public pressure. I forwarded my documentation, minus the personal vendettas, to the local paper's investigative columnist, a guy named Rick I'd gone to high school with. Within a week, the headline read, HOA office built on stolen land. President under scrutiny. The story went viral locally. Even people with no stake in the neighborhood picked sides. Karen made a video statement calling it a coordinated attack by a disgruntled outsider. But the county assessor didn't care about her feelings. They cared about maps, deeds, and code violations. And I had all three. Then came the emergency HOA meeting. I wasn't invited, but I watched from a hill 50 yards away, binoculars in one hand, black coffee in the other. The parking lot overflowed. Voices rose. Hands waved. At one point, Karen stormed out of the building, phone clutched like a lifeline, face red enough to match the sunset. She was unraveling. And I hadn't even hit her with the last blow yet. That came 2 days later. A legal notice stamped with the county seal. Demolition order pending. The building had failed its environmental compliance check. Between the septic leak, zoning violations, and 10 years of unauthorized land use, the board had one choice: pay for a professional relocation within 10 days, or watch their beloved office be torn down brick by brick. By order of the court, the notice was taped to the building door. I drove by at dawn just to see it fluttering in the wind. Beautiful, predictable, deserved. Karen tried to appeal, filed a temporary injunction, claimed the building was culturally significant. The judge laughed. Literally. I was in the courtroom when he read it aloud and chuckled. This is a prefabricated structure built in 2013. It has vinyl siding. Appeal denied. Final step: containment. I walked the perimeter of the building and placed small red flags every 2 feet to indicate the boundary line. A visual reminder that their time was ticking. The board held one last desperate meeting inside. I let them. Because I knew what was coming next. They'd spent a decade pretending they were in charge, that they were the center of the world. But I owned the ground under their feet. And soon, that ground would swallow their office whole, one scoop of steel at a time. The morning of the eviction rolled in quiet and cool, the sky bruised with low clouds like the world itself was holding its breath. I woke up before dawn, brewed a pot of coffee strong enough to chew, and stood on my deck looking out across my lake. No birdsong, no boat wakes, just stillness and a rising sense of inevitability. Today, after months of trespass, manipulation, and sabotage, the hammer was finally going to fall. At 6:00 a.m. Sharp, the county sheriff's cruiser rolled up my gravel drive, followed by a second marked vehicle and a black SUV from the zoning board. Sheriff Colton stepped out in his broad-brimmed hat, thumb resting near his holster, not for violence, but for formality. He tipped his head toward me. "You ready?" I took a long sip from my mug. Born ready. The demolition crew arrived 10 minutes later. 3 trucks, 2 bulldozers, and 1 backhoe operator with a mustache thick enough to be its own authority figure. Their machines rumbled with the low growl of fate. I handed them the papers, court-approved demolition order, signed and stamped, and gestured toward the glass-walled abominations squatting on my land like a parasite fat off dues and deceit. "That's the one," I said. "Treat it like it owes you money." Word must have spread because a crowd had already started forming near the HOA office. Karen arrived last, pulling up in her white Mercedes and practically tripping out of the car in her rush to block the demolition. She was wearing a pantsuit, 3 shades too confident, and holding a megaphone she clearly didn't know how to use. "This is illegal!" she screamed before she was even within range. "You can't do this. We filed for emergency review with the Zoning Appeals Committee." Sheriff Colton stepped forward, unbothered. Review was denied. Structures in violation. Trespass confirmed. 30-day eviction expired last night. Karen spun toward me, hair whipping like static. "You won't get away with this, you small-minded tyrant. This land belongs to the community." I held up the deed. "The land belongs to me." The community can file complaints from the rubble. She turned to her followers, HOA board members, in crisp polos, half the neighborhood in lawn chairs, but their faces were already losing faith. Some looked nervous. Some looked furious. But most looked defeated, like people watching their fake kingdom melt in real time. Then came the rumble. A bulldozer crept forward, treads biting into the gravel path like the first drumbeat of a march. Karen leapt in front of it, arms spread like she was auditioning for a martyrdom poster. "I won't move!" she shouted. "This is sacred space!" The driver stopped 3 feet from her. Didn't honk, didn't rev the engine. Just stared through the glass like he was waiting for a fly to buzz off. Sheriff Colton walked over calmly. "Ma'am, please step aside. You're obstructing a legal operation. I am protecting community property." "You're trespassing," he said, and nodded to his deputy. She moved in and gently, but firmly, escorted Karen away from the bulldozer's path. Karen wailed like she'd just been excommunicated. The crowd filmed everything. Phones pointed. Red recording lights blinking. Karen's legacy, if you could call it that, was going out not in triumph but in pixels and shame, and then the blade hit. The first scoop came in low and slow, biting through the front landscaping like a lion tearing through ribbon. Hydrangeas exploded. Lawn signs crumpled. The HOA's founding pillar plaque snapped in half with a satisfying crack. Karen screamed. I didn't flinch. The glass wall shattered next. One long, glorious arc of destruction as tempered panes fractured and fell like a curtain coming down on a bad performance. The interior was visible now. Conference table, coffee station, rows of framed bylaws, until a second bulldozer swept through and turned it all into a blur of drywall and splinters. A cheer went up from somewhere in the crowd. One voice shouting, "Justice," followed by another laughing, "I always hated that place." HOA board members began backing away slowly, like rats realizing the ship had holes they'd chosen to ignore. I caught Brent, the vice president, trying to slink out the back, clutching a laptop and a box of binders. "Leaving so soon?" I called. He froze. "This is evidence," he blurted. "We were going to hand it over to the county." "Don't worry," I said. "They've already subpoenaed your budget reports. Enjoy your audit." The third machine, the backhoe, started cracking into the building's foundation. Chunks of concrete were pried up like rotten teeth, revealing the soil beneath my soil, finally breathing again after years of insult. It felt personal, and it was. Because this wasn't just revenge for a sunken boat, this was the reclamation of dignity, the erasure of arrogance, the collapse of a paper empire built on theft and pretense. By noon, the office was gone. Just a smear of dust, broken glass, and a bent flagpole that no longer flew anything but defeat. The demolition crew packed up, taking only their machines and a few pieces of debris for documentation. I walked the perimeter again, this time in silence, touching each red survey flag like it was a memorial. Sheriff Colton joined me. "Hell of a thing," he said. "Never seen an HOA get bulldozed before." "First time for everything," I said. "They'll rebuild somewhere," he offered. "Probably," I agreed. "But not here." That afternoon, I held a press conference at the lake's edge. Local news stations had shown up after the demolition footage went viral. I stood in front of the water, boots planted, documents in hand. "I'm not anti-community," I said. "I'm anti-fraud. There's a difference. This HOA was built on stolen land, enforced through intimidation, and propped up by people who thought bylaws were stronger than property rights. Today, we reminded them that land still matters. Ownership still matters, and law still matters." Karen didn't show her face again that day, or the next. Her Mercedes disappeared. For sale signs popped up across Eagle Crest like weeds after a rainstorm. Within a month, The HOA board formally dissolved, citing unsustainable legal exposure. County investigators opened a formal inquiry into misappropriated dues. Turns out the gazebo Karen built in her backyard, paid for with member funds. Her spa weekends, community leadership retreats, the fines I'd been threatened with for my environmental violations, illegally levied. Every dollar was reversed. Every citation voided. And old Ruby? I paid a recovery crew to raise her from the lake. She came up waterlogged but intact. I spent weeks restoring her. New varnish, rewired the engine, polished the brass till it shone like sunlight trapped in metal. I docked her in her rightful spot, this time with a new sign posted beside her. Private. Trespassers will be publicly shamed. And just for good measure, I built a stone marker where the HOA office used to be. Carved into the granite, here stood the empire of arrogance, returned to the earth it never owned. Kids come by to take pictures with it now. Locals nod as they pass. And I sip my coffee on the porch, lake breeze on my face, Old Glory flapping proudly in the wind. The lake is still. The land is quiet. And for the first time in a long time, the silence feels earned.